open and in they come. Move on down the front. Plenty of room. Evening, Titch. How are we? Excellent. Good. Thumbs up. Thumbs up. Jolly good. People still coming in, so we'll just give it another minute or so. People still in the waiting room. Steve Richards has just arrived on his Hershel 400 silver machine, having slipped sideways through time to get here.
I like the sound of that. He's obviously heard Hawkwind before.
Am I going to do the safety talk, Steve? Yes, yes. There'll be the usual announcements about emergency lighting and jolly good, jolly good. Okay. I think in that case, then we will make a start. So I'm not going to share my screen. You can see Peter's got his slide up there. So I will just do my introduction. So good evening, all. Correct me if I'm wrong, Grant, but I think we're on episode 6 of Stargazing now.
That's it, episode 6.
Gotta go. I've learned to count finally, so that's a winner. I hope everybody has had a good week, and chaps, I hope you had a good Father's Day for those that it applies to. For those of you who don't know me, I think you all do by now. I'm Daz. I'm one of the admins here at SGL, and Grant, of course, is here with me. I noticed, Grant, are we still the Horsehead?
Still the Horsehead, yeah.
Still the Horsehead.
It's a bit cloudy.
So as Grant does with the forum, he'll make sure that all the technical bits work. And the usual reminder, we do record the session, and they'll be posted up on YouTube a little later on. So questions, as usual, if you've got a question, we'll ask you to use the chat facility, and Grant and I will keep an eye on those. But we're going to do it just a little bit differently this time. We did this last Wednesday, and it went really well. We're going to let you ask the question. So what we're going to ask is if you put something like a star N or a capital N at the end of your question, if you don't want us to come to you, we will ask the question for you. Otherwise, we'll come to you, unmute you, and you can ask your question directly. So that worked well last Wednesday. So we'll see how that goes. Okay, so enough waffling about the administration. So introduce tonight's speaker. Peter started his astronomical journey way back in the late 60s by pestering the owner of an observatory in the local vicinity. That poor beleaguered owner was a chap called Brian G.W. Manning, and he's a notable discoverer of minor planets. I think it's 19 that he's got to his credit. He took Peter under his wing, and as Peter's skills grew, he got interested in the making of telescopes and actually built his own 6-inch reflector, including the grinding of the mirror. And this was at 12 years old. Not bad at all. In the late 80s, then, with the help of dear old Sir Patrick Moore, Peter founded what is now the Shropshire Astronomical Society. And shortly after the mid-90s, he was elected to the RAS. Fast forward a few years, and in 2012, Peter began working with the BBC Radio Shropshire to present a show called Eye on the Sky, a sky guide with other interesting astronomical activities. And this then led Peter to set up Astro Radio, an internet-based station. It's got sponsorship from people like the Fawkes Telescope, Astronomy Now, and Telescope Australia. It's a very interesting listen. I encourage you to go and listen to it. Peter is now an imaging consultant with the Fawkes Project. He works with Cardiff University on a European project. He's an ambassador for the robotic telescope SLU. He organises Solar Sphere with his daughter Sarah, and still finds times to be a member of 8 different societies and give talks and workshops up and down the country. Do go and visit Peter's website. There's lots of interesting information there. Links to the Astro Radio, Solar Sphere, his own Flickr stream. There's some amazing images on there. And there's also a shop. If you're interested, you can purchase some of Peter's excellent images. As usual, we'll post up links to the various pages on the forum afterwards. So Peter's in very high demand. If you look at the schedule that Peter runs, you'll understand why we are extremely pleased to have Peter with us here tonight. And a very interesting sounding talk it is too. So I will let Peter do the introduction. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. You can hear me okay? Yep. Everything working fine?
Perfectly from my end.
Good, good. Okay, so the reason behind this talk, and it might sound a bit bizarre, Herschel to Hawkwind, it's about astronomy and music. Because although Daz read out my my astronomical CV, I have a musical CV as well. I started playing bass when I left school. That was my first job, playing bass with a band called Noggin, and went on to play with Bob Calvert, from Hawkwind. Through the years, I've worked with many bands such as Budgie, and met all varying members of Hawkwind as well through the years. And for a while was a professional musician. Playing bass, so hence the music and the astronomy link. And I do a lot of talks which I call dry talks, which are straight down the line astronomy talks and how to use telescopes and how to do imaging. And I thought I've got to come up with a fun talk, so I put this talk together, and it works great live. This is the first time I've done it on Zoom, so you're all my guinea pigs tonight. It works great live, and I've done it at varying astronomical societies, and it's the only talk you'll go to an astronomical society where you get a bloke playing bass and you have a sing-song and people get up and dance. So it's a little bit different. And what it does, it looks at all aspects of how music and space have worked together. And although it's called Herschel to Hawkwind, we go right back to Paleolithic times, even before I was young. So we go back 46,000 years, and to look at how they produce music. And what we can see from the cave paintings as well is they weren't only producing music, they were playing the music and worshipping the skies as well. And many archaeologists have found paintings around the world. They've been found in Americas, in Europe, in Asia, of these musical instruments being played, but also worshipping the night sky. So that's our first link of the night sky and music. How did they play music? Well, they played music by creating flutes. They made flutes from mammoth tusks and animal bones, and many of these have been found. And they are musically correct. They're musically perfect. And they also played drums by hitting hollow objects. And what we tried to do, I got some musicians to actually reconstruct some of these instruments and try and play some what we would have thought they would have played. I mean, we're not going to know. It could be, I know that it's the first rock music. Come on. You've got to have a joke somewhere, haven't you? It's the first rock music. So I'm going to play a piece that some of my fellow musicians put together using reconstructed original instruments. Now imagine this being played and I'm looking up to the night sky. Go back 46,000 years. If you go to Liverpool Museum, you will find some evidence of these. There's some old instruments that they have found in some of these caves, so it's worth going and having a look at. But it's just to think that that was the first link between the sky and music. Then we come to the Druids. Who's been to Stonehenge? I can't see you putting your hands up, but I always say this one. I always say it's going to be better when it's finished. I've been to Stonehenge many times as a hippie, I have to say. And sometimes we were supposed to be there and sometimes not. But we have the Druids. Now, the Druids were known as the high-ranking professional class in the ancient Celtic cultures. But because of their doctrine, they weren't allowed to write this down. And so we know that they constructed, the Druids and the cultures going back, constructed places like Stonehenge. We believe they were constructed to map the heavens and to look for solstices when the sun rose or the moon rose. Why they did that, probably to do with crop rotation, etc. But also, we know that music was played because when some of these stone circles have been sort of excavated, they found musical instruments. So they know music was being played at the same time. So if you can imagine being there with these sort of chants going on and music being played. And of course, you know, they did the odd sacrifice as well, sacrificing, you know, maybe they're politicians. We could be doing that now, couldn't we, really? We should be doing that now, to be perfectly honest. But if you can imagine being there, being at Stonehenge. Now that picture was taken by a guy, I think you might know him. I think it was Steve Tonkin who took that picture, if I believe correctly, that's on the screen at the moment, binocular fella. He lives down near Stonehenge. Also, we still have druids today. We run the Solar Sphere Festival, it's astronomical and music, and we do have druids come to Solar Sphere. And this is some of the music that they produce now, these days. Come to Solar Sphere, and they do musical rituals and worshipping the sky, and that's still going on today. So if you come to Solar Sphere, you can come and see real druids dressed up as druids as well. It's very strange. But also, it was interesting to see that they did the solstice this year from Stonehenge, but it was online. I mean, it's the first time I've ever seen the solstice on Zoom, which was something different. But there we go. I mean, we've all had to adapt, and even the hippies have had to adapt and come up with technology. But we move on to the ancient Greeks. Now, the ancient Greeks, and they had the word for music, which was musa, and muse, art of the muses. They produced many, many pieces of music. And this particular piece, Music of the Heavens, again, looking at the night sky, thinking about the heavens and the movement of the planets and the movement of the stars. They produced music using stringed instruments, and they also they did leave musical notation. Now, for those that can read music, that's great. But for those like myself who can't read music, we look at a thing called tabulation. Now, the Greeks wrote a lot of tabulation, and this is where you have the pictures of the strings of the instrument and the little dots where you put your fingers. Now, that's how the Greeks wrote a lot of their music. And there's evidence of this. And again, I've got some musicians to reconstruct this piece of music using the original manuscripts and using reconstructed original instruments. And of course, the piece of music is called Music of the Heavens. So that's the link again, but we'll come back more to the ancient Greeks after this piece of music. But the interesting thing about this is this piece of music sounds very Japanese. From that to Pythagoras. Now, Pythagoras, he believed that the movement of the planets and the movement of the sun, because we still believed at this point that the Earth was the center of the universe, and he believed that the movement of the planets and the movement of the stars must have some form of harmony, because he said angles and mathematics has some sort of harmony. Therefore, the movement of the planets must have some sort of harmony. And he called this music of the spheres. That was the first time we heard that term, music of the spheres. And he said, at the end of the day, he says astronomy was for the eyes, and he said music was for the ears. And he said the two are linked. So that's where he actually believed that, that the planets and the movement of the planets had some form of music. He believed it was inaudible. You couldn't hear it, but it was there. And that was the first time we heard the term music of the spheres. And of course, the Greeks also invented the term astron, which is the law of the stars, where we get astronomy from now. And as you can see on that picture there, that the Earth was still firmly placed at the center. But he was actually believing, and Hipparchus of Nicosia, they believed that the movement of the planets must have some harmony. And it was later on that Kepler actually came up with the notation for the planets, which we'll come to in a bit. But also, the Egyptians also worshipped the skies, they worshipped the stars, they worshipped Ra, the sun god, they worshipped the moon, Apophis, and the movement, and they created pieces of music which were played as worship. They were also played at workshops, palaces, farms, and battlefields. And this is a reconstruction. It would have been nice to have been able to be there and hear the music. This is just a reconstruction. It's a piece about Ra. But just imagine being back in those times. As we can see, as it went on, the harmony of the world, the music of the spheres started to take a different shape. And on the one picture, it's weird this because I can't press my pointer on Zoom, but you can see muses, which are different aspects of music linked to different planets. And many astronomers started to believe that there was actually harmony in the movement of the planets. And it was Kepler who came up with notation, and he gave a note. And depending on the speed and the movement of the planet, changed the pitch of the note. So it was called polyphonic, which is monophonic, which is one note. And if you had several planets together, you got polyphonic, which is a chord. And then he started to realize that there were moons around planets. So he created bigger chords. Now, I'd have loved to have seen him create a chord for Saturn now with 82 moons. 82 fingers you would have needed to press that chord down. But he actually believed that this was how the heavens would have sounded. And he wrote several books. And one of the books was Mysterium Cosmographicum, or Mystery of the Universe. And there was a series of books on which he wrote pieces of music around the different planets. So it's interesting to see that although Kepler's, a well-known astronomer, he was also bringing music into astronomy. But moving on through the years, as we move towards the present day, technology and science started to keep precedence, but music was still in our soul. Now, I don't know how many practical astronomers there are in there who go and sit outside and look through the telescopes. But me, for one, when I look through a telescope and I see an astronomical object, whether it be a galaxy, a planet, I hear music in my head. And that's where I get it from. I always say music's in my soul. So when I look at a planet or I look at an astronomical object, I hear music, and I create music around those feelings. So it's great to be able to go out. And I was talking to Chris Lintott recently on one of my interviews, and he said he feels the same. He said, but he needs a bottle of whiskey to help it along a little bit. And so I don't do that, no. And I think somebody's on the port tonight as well on here. So many scientists were also musicians, even up to the present day, and astronomers were no exception to the rule. And we all know William Herschel. William Herschel, in his early days, William was a musician, and he was born in Hanover in 1738, and he came over to the UK to work in Buckinghamshire, and that's where he later died. But from Buckinghamshire, he moved up north towards Preston area, and there he became an organist and also an accomplished musician. And while studying music up in the Preston area, up in Lancashire, he picked up a book because he was getting bored at some of his classes, and he picked up a book by chance on making optics. And by picking up this book on making optics, we know where his path went to next. He decided he wanted to build telescopes, and he realized not soon after building his first telescopes that if you wanted to see deeper into space, you've got to build bigger and bigger mirrors. And he developed the methods, and they were some of the methods being used by the Ross family over in Burr in Ireland, building large speculum mirrors, mirrors made out of metal. And he built his first large telescope, and later on in 1781, he discovered Uranus. That gave him fame as an astronomer, and he got the job as Astronomer Royal. And they also gave him a fantastic wage of £200 a year. That would have been a lot of money in those days, wouldn't it, really, when you think about it? But yes, William Herschel originally was a musician. Now, when he went to many places to do his astronomical talks, he would also play music, and he wrote many, many symphonies. And that's one of his original manuscripts, which was from the if you go to the Royal Astronomical Society Library, a lot of his original manuscripts are there, and a lot of them are at the Herschel Museum as well down in Bath. But that's one of his original manuscripts for one of his symphonies. And when he would go to do his astronomical talks, and that's probably a painting of one of his astronomical talks, he and his sister, Caroline, would perform music beforehand. Now, we always say, was that the first astronomical and music festival? Was he the first to do it, playing music before he did his astronomical talks? But this is actually one of William Herschel's symphonies played by the Austrian Mozart Orchestra. So there we have one of William Herschel's, and it's nice to think that, you know, William Herschel, who discovered Uranus, he actually wrote music like that as well. Very talented man. And also his sister, who came over, she was also, would not only play harpsichord at some of his concerts, she also sang as well, and also helped him with his observations and discovered several comets in her own right. So it was a very, very interesting family. And that was one of her original manuscripts, which can be found at the Herschel Museum down in Bath as well. And of course, we come on to other music that's got space links. and we come on to Gustav Holst and the planets. Now, everybody, when I asked them, said, "Oh, Holst, the planets, it's all about astronomy." Actually, it was about astrology. And the reason it's about astrology is there's no Earth in the in his music. And when he was asked, he said, yeah, he wrote it on from an astrological point of view and not an astronomical point of view. But I think one of the most famous pieces off of Holst, the planets, has to be Mars. My favorite piece actually is Jupiter off that pieces of music, but Mars is actually used by many, many rock bands. And the beginning of Mars, which is, I edited that bit out, I just needed to get it to a certain length, but the beginning of the Mars part is actually the same sequence or the same chord sequence that Black Sabbath used on their very first album, Black Sabbath, for the track Black Sabbath. And Mars itself, the structure of the actual piece of music is used by many lead guitarists in rock music to structure their lead solo. So if you have a listen to that and you listen to some rock bands, you'll hear the links. Now we come on to another very, very well-known scientist and astronomer and theoretical physicist who was also a very, very accomplished musician. And of course, that was Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein was a very, very accomplished musician. And he played violin and played piano. And there's not many recordings about of Einstein playing music, but I managed to get hold of this one. And this is Mozart's Sonata in B flat major. And this is not a reproduction. You think about this. This is actually Einstein playing the violin. And for me as a musician and astronomer, that's quite an emotional thing. Thing is, what was he thinking about when he played that piece of music? Was he thinking about the piece of music or E equals MC squared? We will never know. As science moved on and astronomy moved on, we had Lowell discovering, or what he thought he had discovered was the canals on Mars, which led people to believe there were civilizations on Mars, that there were people up there, there were all sorts of things going on Mars. And that led to hysteria about Martians and everybody seeing Martians and wanting to see Martians. And in 1938, on the radio, Orson Welles read a play called The War of the Worlds. And because many people tuned in after the beginning of the play, they thought this was for real. And it caused a mass panic across America. And then radio stations around the world decided that all the way through, and that still stands today, when there's a play happening, you will hear every so often some form of dialogue within that play to say that it's a play. Because the Americans, it was in the papers next day, people thought that they were heading for bunkers and shelters because they thought the Martians were here. And of course, that led to one of the most famous musical albums ever. And we all know, if anybody doesn't know this piece, well.
No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that human affairs were being watched by intelligences which inhabited the timeless worlds of space. No one could have dreamed we were being scrutinized as someone with a microscope studies creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. Few men even considered the possibility of life on other planets. And yet, across the gulf of space, minds immeasurably superior to ours regarded this Earth with envious eyes. And slowly and surely, they drew their plans against us.
Play the album. I'm only playing the introduction. Sorry about that. But if you ever get the chance to go and see the stage play of that, it is phenomenal. I've seen it. I've seen the stage play for that. It is absolutely amazing. Now I'm coming on to pieces of music that you hear and you don't think of the title of the piece of music. You think of what it represents astronomically or sci-fi wise. And the first piece, I believe, should be the national anthem. We should replace the present national anthem with this. And we all know what this is, don't we? And when I do this live, everybody stands up. Now, how many people, when they hear that, go instantly, they go, oh, I know that. That's Sibelius at the Castle Gate. They go Sky at Night. I don't know anybody that's ever said to me, that's Sibelius at the Castle Gate. In fact, I had to go and look that up because I didn't know. And the other piece we hear, it's associated with a sci-fi movie, but as soon as you hear it, you think of the sci-fi movie and not the piece of music. Remember that, I guess. And who remembers this? You never think of Vangelis when you hear this. You think of the show. Yeah, Cosmos with Carl Sagan. I remember that well. So in 1957, Sputnik was launched. It frightened the Americans to death, this little bleeping object going over America that they could do nothing about. They all believed they were getting spied on. And it was the beginning of the space race. But it was also the beginning of the writing of a lot of space-themed tunes. And then, of course, Yuri Gagarin, first human in space in 1961. That was another groundbreaking event. And the launch of the first telecommunications satellite in 1962. And this was what I will class as the first space rock record, the first track I ever heard linked with space. And some of you may remember this. I remember it well. I was old enough. Was the father of the guitarist in the band Muse, which still plays space music, and we'll come to a little bit later on. Also, music was used a lot in documentaries and that to create emotion over space or astronomical events. And this is the bit I love. It's The Day That Humans Became Aliens, and it features Brian Eno's Apollo, and it's the landing sequence of one of the Apollo modules. Of course, the floodgates opened. Lots of music started to be written about the moon landings, about going to the moon, and none other than David Bowie. And we will say,
Sick of playing guitar.
pleasure of interviewing a well-known space station commander who loved David Bowie, and I took this space station commander to one of his gigs in the car, and we got there, and the car park attendant looked at him and he said, "You're that Space Oddity guy, aren't you?" And he goes, "I commanded a space station." But he secretly wanted to be a rock star, and we all know who that was. It was Commander Chris Hadfield, and he painted himself up there in the same garb as David Bowie. And the story related to me was the fact that when he performed Space Oddity on the space station, David Bowie rang him up and was absolutely amazed that his track had been played in space. And on the other side of the coin, Chris Hadfield couldn't believe that David Bowie, his biggest idol, had actually phoned him up. So we'll have that piece, shall we?
Ground control to Major Tom. Ground control to Major Tom. Lock your Soyuz hatch and put your helmet on. 10. Ground control 9, to Major Tom. 8, 7, 6. Commencing countdown, engines on. 3, 2. Detach from station and may God's love be with you. This is ground control to Major Tom. You've really made the grade, and the papers want to know whose shirts you wear. But it's time to guide the capsule if you dare. This is Major Tom to ground control. I've left forevermore, and I'm floating in a most peculiar way, and the stars look very different today. For here am I sitting in a tin can, far above the world. Planet Earth is blue, and there's nothing left to do. Though I've flown 100,000 miles, I'm feeling very still. And before too long, I know it's time to go. Our commander comes down back to earth and knows. Ground control to Major Tom, the time is near, there's not too long. Can you hear me, Major Tom? Can you hear me, Major Tom? Can you hear me, Major Tom? Can you hear? Am I floating in my tin can? A last glimpse of the world. Planet Earth is blue, and there's nothing
He wrote a whole series of songs on the space station called Space Sessions Songs from a Tin Can. And when you listen to the words that Bowie wrote, they fit. I know he changed them a little bit because the astronaut lived on that one. He didn't live on David Bowie's, of course. So you know, it just to think now that music has been written on the space station, it's amazing. And of course, space was in our minds and music was in our souls. And lots of tracks started to come out.
And I think it's gonna be a long, long time. The touchdown brings me round again to find I'm not the man they think I am at home. Oh, no, no, no. I'm a rocket man, burning out his fuse out here alone. And I think it's gonna be a long, long time till touchdown brings me round again to find I'm not the man they think I am at home. Oh, no, no, no. I'm a rocket man, burning out his fuse out here alone. I'm the urban spaceman, baby. I've got speed. I've got everything I need. I'm the urban spaceman, baby. I can fly. I'm a supersonic guy. Hey, Mr. Spaceman, won't you please take me along? I won't do anything wrong. Hey, Mr. Spaceman, won't you please take me along for a ride? Woke up this morning, I was feeling quite weird. Had flies in my beard, my toothpaste was smeared. Over my window, they'd written my name. Said, so long, we'll see you again. Hey, Mr. Spaceman, won't you please take me along? I won't do anything wrong. Hey, Mr. Spaceman, won't you please take me along for a ride?
literally millions of songs we could put in that sequence. Where do you end? And every time I do this talk anywhere, I get emails for the next week telling me what I should put in. But you can put endless songs in. But of course, in 1968, 69, we went to the moon, and a new genre of music was formed, and it was called space rock. And it was formed by the band. And this is where we get to the Hawkwind bit. Hawkwind, a space rock band, first space rock band ever, writing music specifically about space and space sci-fi and the rest. And if you've ever heard of Hawkwind, I'm sure you'd have heard of some of the tracks that I'm going to play here, bits of tracks. And this was one of the original best Hawkwind lineups. We got, first of all, on the right, you've got Lemmy, who went on to form Motorhead, but his first band was Hawkwind. Dave Brock, who's still with Hawkwind now at the age of 78, still touring, and just released another album. And that will be their 1053rd album since 1969. Then you've got Simon King, the drummer at the time, who's now in a mental asylum. Sadly, Lemmy's not with us anymore. You've got Nick Turner sitting on the floor, who I regularly meet up with at festivals these days, who has to be carried onto stage literally because he is, well, I don't know whether it's drugs or age, but it's a combination of both. And you've got Dick Mick and Del Detmar sitting over on the far side. That was the best Hawkwind lineup. When they played live, you'll notice a man stood in the middle holding sheets of papers. That's a famous writer called Michael Moorcock. Michael Moorcock, who was a sci-fi writer, also did all the narration between Hawkwind songs and still to this day does narration for Hawkwind. They started to release albums like In Search of Space, which was basically you were on the spaceship Hawkwind, went to space, and the tracks all represented space. Then you've got the most famous live album there, the Space Ritual Live, which was performed around the country in 1972 with tracks like Earth Calling, Born to Go, Down Through the Night. And it's basically, it's a journey through space and time. And that is probably one of the only surviving photographs. There's not many from that time in 1972, and that was at Liverpool Empire. And this was a track, a segment of a track, good for astronomers. It's called Hurry on Sundown.
Sundown, see what tomorrow brings. Hurry on sundown, see what tomorrow brings. Well, I may bring more, any old thing. Look into your mind's eye, see what you can see. Look into your mind's eye, see what you can see. There's hundreds of people like you and me. Oh, hurry on Sunday.
Now, just after they did that tour, they had a hit. Now, they didn't want a hit. They were a hippie band. They used to play outside the festivals for nothing. And they played outside the Albert Hall for nothing, but we'll come to that again in a minute. But one of the most famous tracks they wrote became a hit. Now, everybody thinks Silver Machine, and I think somebody turned up on his Silver Machine tonight. Silver Machine, everybody thinks, was written about a spaceship. It was actually Bob Calvert's push bike he used to do his mum's shopping on. It was silver, and he called it the Silver Machine. And this...
When I was at college, I actually looked like these guys. It's 1972, Hawkwind, Silver Machine.
And they still continue today. They did in 2014, they played the Shepherd's Bush with a Space Ritual Relived tour.
Space is dark. so endless. When you're lost, it's so relentless. It is so big, it is so small. Why does man try to act so tall? Is this the reason? Deep in our mind.
You'll notice they have a backdrop. It's projections of space images. I'm pleased to say that most of those are my astronomical photographs. I still managed to get me oar into Hawkwind a little bit. And of course, we said they've released 1,053 albums, summer compilations, live, whatever, but 1,053. And you've got albums such as Out of the Shadows, In Your Area, Alien 4, Love in Space, Space Bandits, Hall of the Mountain Grill, Warrior on the Edge of Time. It's endless. And they've just released their latest album, All Aboard the Skylark, was released just before Christmas this year. And they celebrate last year their 50th year. And as I said, they used to play outside the Albert Hall as hippies for free. This year, they played the Albert Hall with a full orchestra at £75 a ticket. So their hippie values have gone. And they play a kind of swing music as well. But there he is. There's the man who started Hawkwind, now 78. This was last year at the Albert Hall. Still going strong, still playing Hawkwind music. Hawkwind are still touring and recording. And hats off to them after all this time. Never changed their format, never changed their ideals, except that they charge a lot of money to go to the concerts now. But there we go. And we move on. Music and Space still out there. Voyager 1 and 2 took gold discs with lots of sounds of the earth on, but they also took music, and they also took Welcome Planet Earth, etc., in many languages. And because I live on the Welsh border and I do this talk a lot in Wales, I thought I'd better put the Welsh bit on. And this was supposed to be a recording of the sound, the entire sounds of the earth all condensed. That was on the record. What I want to know is how aliens would have known how to play a record if they found it. I mean... And then if they did, they got Chuck Berry.
His mother told him someday you will be a man and you will be the leader of a big old band.
There wasn't just Chuck Berry on there. There was lots of classical pieces as well. But the bit that everybody remembers is Chuck Berry. The first shuttle mission, when it went into space, just as before the shuttle mission was launched, a piece was recorded by a German artist that referred to Major Tom and going into space and being weightless. And the commander of this mission decided that he was going to play this piece of music as they entered orbit. And it was played on the shuttle as they entered orbit.
Standing there alone, the ship is waiting, all systems are go. Are you sure? Control is not convinced, but the computer has the evidence. No need to abort. The countdown starts. Watching in a trance, the crew is certain, nothing left to chance. All is working, trying to relax. Up in the capsule, sent me up a drink. Jokes, Major Tom. The count goes on. 4, 3, 2, 1. Earth below us, drifting, falling, floating, weightless, calling, calling home.
We all love to put music on in the car, and it gives you, I don't know, creates mood. It does for me. But imagine being in a shuttle and putting music on to create mood as you enter orbit. Joy Division released an album with the first pulsar map on. They hadn't got a clue what they were putting on the front of the album when they did it, because they liked it, they put it on. And that was the first time that Joy Division had used a pulsar map. But also there were other album covers and bands that were releasing music about space recently. And we've got Muse. Black Holes and Revelation. Brian Eno, Apollo Atmospheres. Most famous one, Final Countdown. Rush and Cygnus X1. Space Station number 5. Of course, modern day astronomers and scientists and musicians. Anybody recognize anybody there? Can't hear you. So top right, that's a band called Dare, and that's Brian Cox. We all know that one, but does anybody know that one? Well, it's me. I had to get myself in, didn't I? And of course, the most famous one, Patrick Moore on his xylophone, and we had to find a footage of that. Brilliant. Patrick Moore playing the xylophone. Then we got Brian May, New Horizons.
T-minus 15 seconds.
Ready. Roger.
15 seconds.
11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. We have liftoff of NASA's New Horizons spacecraft
The revelations of New Horizons may help us to understand better how our solar system was formed.
Brilliant. And of course, we're still getting a duets and music from the space station. And I think this is to celebrate Yuri Gagarin's launch into space. I just love the hair on the astronaut in this. It floats all over the place. She's lucky.
Tonight, Ian Anderson and I would like to honor Yuri Gagarin for his brave journey 50 years ago, and we would like to celebrate the role that humans play in the exploration of our universe, past, present, and future, by sharing some music between Earth and space.
Thanks, Colonel Catherine Coleman in the International Space Station. We should remember that today's cosmonauts, scientists and astronauts are still every bit the rocket heroes they were 50 years ago. So from the cultural city of Perm in Russia, let's salute Katie, Dima and Paolo up there in orbit, and of course, the legendary Yuri Gagarin. Go safely.
We're still producing music using natural sounds. It's a project I'm working on at the moment. I'm using the natural sounds of a pulsar. Stellar seismology. We're sampling these sounds and putting them into music. One thing we'd love to be true, and we love to be a fact, is string theory. Now, of course, that would fit the universe and music together, wouldn't it? I actually did a talk with a guy from CERN, and I told him before I did my first Herschel to Hawkwind, he had a week to prove string theory. He failed me. He didn't do it. And he'd come back to me and he says, I can't rectify the 11 dimensions. So I said, well, I'm just going to go with it anyway. Elon Musk, as much as we all despise the man for his Starlink satellites, you got to love him for his SpaceX stuff, his rockets. And one of the most coolest things ever, I think, was a Tesla going around the Earth playing Bowie music on its CD player, and it was like sci-fi come true. And
there's a starman waiting in the sky. He'd like to come and meet us, but he thinks he'd blow our minds. There's a starman waiting in the sky. He's told us not to blow it, 'cause he knows it's all worthwhile. He told me, let the children use it, let the children use it, let all the children do get. But the film is a sad thing for she's lived it 10 times or more. She could spit in the eyes of fools if they ask her to focus on sailors fighting in the dance hall. Oh man, look at those cavemen go. It's the freakiest show. Take a look at the long man beating up the wrong guy. Oh man, wonder if you'll ever know who's in the best-selling show. Is there life on Mars?
and we'll finish with this track, I think.
Whenever life gets you down, Mrs. Brown, and things seem hard or tough, and people are stupid, obnoxious or daft, and you feel that you've had quite enough, just remember that you're standing on a planet that's evolving and revolving at 900 miles an hour. That's orbiting at 19 miles a second, so it's reckoned a sun that is the source of all our power. The sun and you and me and all the stars that we can see are moving at 1,000,000 miles a day in an outer spiral arm at 40,000 miles an hour of the galaxy we call the Milky Way.
Thank you very much for listening. I thought I put a picture of me actually doing the bass at the end. Shall I stop sharing the screen so you can see me?
Why not? Why not? Pete, that was absolutely fantastic. Thanks thanks very much indeed.
Different.
That was
Certainly
super.
is.
Thank you.
Some amazing facts in there as well. I was just trying to work out how many albums a year that's Hawkwind are knocking out then at that rate. That's phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, I did the radio version of this, and of course I play all the. I mean, I've cut a lot of the songs short because we're time constricted, if you like. You can go on to the Astro Radio site and listen to the full radio version where it plays the entirety of songs, and it's 3 hours long.
Well, I have to say there's no time limit on the Zoom sessions that we have here, but some people, including me, have got work in the morning, so so perhaps 3 hours might have been a bit too long. So some excellent comments coming in. Yeah, really love. Bloody brilliant, says Titch. Really enjoyed that. Absolutely love that. Thank you. Anybody got any questions for Pete? If you have, let me know, and we will unmute you. I didn't know about Michael Moorcock either. I shall certainly reread his books with a bit more interest now.
Yeah, because I mean, a lot of the Hawkwind songs are written around, like there was the Chronicle of the Black Sword. They did a whole tour on that one, and that was written around his book Elric and one thing and another. And there's a lot of space references in that as well.
Oh,
there's an awful lot. An awful lot. We were actually, it was a few days ago. We were supposed to do a stage version of this at Hershel with a band.
Okay.
And it was all set up to do, and of course it's not happened. So that'll happen next year. And the idea is I got lots of astronomers to play instruments, and we actually perform the songs as well.
Oh, excellent.
And with laser lights and all the rest of it. You know.
we're gonna have to get you back, Peter.
Yeah,
No
most
problem.
definitely.
That was very entertaining. Thank you.
Somebody's put a comment on that Patrick's car is going to be at Solar Sphere next year. The Arc.
Yeah, Ian is the Rother Valley Optics, who own the car. They're now a sponsor of Astro Radio, main sponsor, and they're going to drive the car down to Solar Sphere, and it'll be there for people to hopefully not clamber over, but sit in and have their photograph taken. But Ian's actually going to drive it down rather than bring it on a transporter. He's going to actually drive it down. So I said, I think you're mad driving it down into mid Wales in all that blooming. It's bound to be raining, isn't it? So.
Did they, I know it sat. Obviously in the Farthings for some years without moving. So presumably then it's been resurrected, serviced, and
yeah, it's fully restored, and Ian actually drives it to work from home.
Oh right,
yeah.
Okay.
He's actually, if you do a search on YouTube, it's do Rother Valley Optics a search and do Patrick Moore's car. He's done a video of himself inside it driving it to work. So it's worth having a look at.
Indeed. I can't believe it. Nobody's got a question at this precise moment in time. Lots of amazing comments, but no questions for you, people.
Well, it's not the sort of thing you can ask questions about, is it really? That's what I say when we do it.
Oh, go on then.
Dave Galvin, Pete, what's your earliest space tune recollection? He's saying here's his Telstar and Fireball XL5.
It's got to be Fireball XL5. Definitely Fireball XL5, and then Telstar. And tell Galvin he's as old as me, so he's going to know, isn't he?
Jolly good. So no, well, apart from that, that's the only question we've had come in. So in that case, Pete, we won't take up any of your time. Thank you ever so much for that. That was absolutely brilliant. Lots of nodding comments, a lot of people nodding their heads there. So thank you all for joining us.
But if you need me back to do a serious talk.
Oh, absolutely. We'll definitely be having you back, Peter. That was fantastic.
And of course, hopefully, perhaps in the not too distant future, Peter, we'll actually get to see you live at one of our events. That would be amazing.
Yeah, I was looking forward to that as well, to be honest.
So were we.
Yeah.
But I think it was also the promise of the hog roast or something.
Yeah.
Okay, folks. Thanks very much.
Super.
Anyway, I'll see you soon.
That's great. Take care, everybody. Thank you very much indeed.
Just before we go, next week, we're being joined by Gary Palmer to talk about solar imaging. Gary is probably the most respected solar imager in the UK, and is knocking out some absolutely stonking stuff. So that should be a really entertaining talk, going through some of the sort of techniques, the equipment, the processing of solar in particular. So that should be very interesting. And you never know, we might even see the sun one of these days.
Oh yeah, well, Gary's obviously seeing it somewhere, but not too sure where from. Fantastic. Okay, we'll look forward to seeing you all next week then. Do keep an eye on the forum. Obviously, we are hoping to do another midweek session. Clearly, they're not going to be as frequently as the Sunday sessions, but we're looking to set another one of those up in the not too distant future. So otherwise, enjoy what's left of your weekend. Have a great week, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Night all. Great.